Hey everybody, Mark Nelson here. Some of you may have heard of me or seen me at conferences before. I have a new title. I've stepped away from my consultancy and I'm now Chief of Staff at the Nuclear Company. So for all the Nuclear Company questions, feel free to see me after the talk because this is a panel about these gentlemen.
But congratulations, Mark.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I appreciate it. So you're one of my favorite audiences I've had in a long time. Why? Because I only like to talk to lucky people. And you're the lucky people that chose this room, which by the way was the furthest from the coffee and the break, meaning you had to choose to be here. That selection, it means a lot to me, and I hope we'll have a really good, lively discussion and we get to some pressing issues and then everybody else realizes they're unlucky at the break. So, up here with me, we've got Simon Irish, CEO of Terrestrial Energy, Rick Springman, President and Global Clean Energy Opportunities at Holtec International. We've got Stephen Comello, Executive Director of the Nuclear Scaling Initiative, Cesare Frappoli, the COO and Director of Regulatory Affairs at Terra Innovatum, and finally, in your magazine, you will see Dr. John Butler. He's gone, I'm here. We'll see if I can do better than my ghostly peer. Yeah, I did. Thanks. Appreciate it. See, already we've got that flow, and if you guys have questions that are pressing for our panelists, feel free to raise your hand, and depending on how we're going on time, we might get those questions, or we might say thank you, we'll take them at the end of our regularly scheduled contributions. So, financing nuclear. I've heard very lively, heated conversations over the last few months about what financing nuclear means, whether it's the challenge or other things are the challenge and the financing falls into place. I've heard some of those very strong opinions from people here on this panel. Let's see if I can drag it out of them, even in such a professional setting. So, I'm going to start with Simon. Something I got to point out. There's a lot of reactor companies these days. Some of them even have similar names. Terrestrial Energy has one of the distinctions that through their activities and through the activities of their leadership, they've been a very important ally to what you might call the nuclear movement or the youth in nuclear. There's been a lot of support coming from Terrestrial folks to get, well, people like me to conferences and to get the word out around the world. So I just want to say if any of you are particularly enjoying this hot nuclear moment, a lot of things went into it, but a lot of dedication over a lot of years from supporters like Terrestrial has been part of it. So thank you, Simon. Just wanted to embarrass you first on stage. So you're working on an advanced reactor design and you want to export. What has been the most persuasive argument that you found for investors, especially lately? Is it climate, cost competitiveness, or energy security?
So, Mark, very good question. It depends who you're talking to. From a financial perspective, I've taken the rule since we formed the company that you have to be very, very clear with a couple of things up front. When you engage with a financial audience, you have to assume the person on the other side of the table is only motivated by the obvious to make some money. Okay, you start there, don't drift too far away from that. And then the next question is, what is your proposal to them, which will get them at first instance motivated? And that concerns, I would call it your question statement, what problem is worth solving with your money? So it starts off there from a capital perspective. From our perspective, from Terrestrial Energy's perspective, from the get-go, we have stated, and this is the sort of where it all starts with our engagement with our capital providers over the years, we think the problem that's worth solving with nuclear is affordability and cost-competitive nuclear energy. And as a business, everything is directed towards that. When you're dealing with other constituencies, you can emphasize the fact you're dealing with environmental issues. Actually, and some investors do respond to that. When you're talking to a public policy audience, you will probably be emphasizing national security issues. When you're talking to a PUC commissioner at the state level, you'll be talking about some of the virtues of a power plant, such as black start capability and load following capability. But when you're talking to investors, the guy with the checkbook, you have to appeal to his bank account. Okay, and we have done it by saying very explicitly, we as a business have set up the innovator in the nuclear tech sector, and this is a problem whether we think is worth solving your money, is affordability and cost. You also have to be careful about this proposal because people don't respond to that type of statement if you've got a marginal argument. We think we can do a little bit better. A little bit better in anything in the investment world accrues to the incumbent. For example, Apple that will do the next iPhone, it's called the iPhone 18, I don't know whether they've got to now, but that type of idea of marginal improvement. If, as a startup innovator, and this is where we started our journey, 2012, 2013, you have to come to the table with a very clear statement, and it has to be transformative. We think we can solve that problem that you agree is worth solving and doing it in a transformative way. So, Martin,
well then, here's what...
there for a...
Yeah, no, I appreciated that. But okay, so 2012, 2013, there's a very good chance, and tell me if I'm wrong, that for a lot of your existence so far, you were the first ones to talk about nuclear to a given manager of capital, right?
Yes, we started, and the capital equation has been difficult because if you start in 2012, 2013, I'll tell you what, no one cared. 99.999% of the world had no care at all. You needed to zero in and focus on the person who had that vision. And from our perspective, our investment proposition to the guy with the checkbook who's looking for something transformative included the statement such as this: the world may not care today, but if you run the numbers and think objectively, analytically about the future direction of the world, you will wake up one day in the not too distant future where the world would realize you need a massive expansion of nuclear energy supply. I mean, that's the moment that we are building towards as a company. So that's another element of the investment proposition. I'd say that moment has arrived in 2025. It's a singular moment, it's a secular moment, it's a unique moment, and it says something so vastly different now for the nuclear tech sector. Because the enabler of action in the nuclear tech sector, which always is the case, okay, the guys providing the capital now. They're providing the capital. I think many have seen the valuations that companies are getting in the public realm. We can say, well, that's strange. That's a lot of value. Okay, that is sending a signal, a very clear signal that now is the moment for the nuclear tech sector to get on with the job of developing to market those big ticket solutions, those high impact solutions. And that is what 2025 is for the nuclear tech sector. This is a different moment. It's opportunity-led, not risk-led. It's opportunity-led.
Thanks, Simon.
Yeah.
Appreciated the comments. Rick, we'll turn to you. So Holtec has been around doing something unusual for an SMR vendor. They've been making money in nuclear. So no shade to anybody else. I'm just saying there's different purposes for different companies. We just have an interesting situation where you've been part of the connective tissue of the nuclear industry already. But you've been making money with things that I've heard haters say that I would never say it in public, but I've heard other people say you've been making things with no moving parts. You know, these big canisters whose very nature is to sit there very securely and not move. Now, part of what you've been doing for the nuclear industry is proving for a fact that if we build nuclear plants, there's a safe and quick and even profitable way to take them apart. And all of that leads up to the moment where now Holtec has an unusual basis for claiming they have the offering that's going to take off for SMRs. Can you tell me the primary advantages from your point of view of Holtec's proposal to build SMRs?
Yeah, so we started our SMR program in around 2011, right after Fukushima, so similar time frame, when everyone was getting out of nuclear. But the company had been around a lot longer. We were founded in 1986. It's basically a heat exchanger design and manufacturing company. And we grew the business. We went from heat exchangers into spent fuel storage. We developed more cost-effective type of equipment. We competed against Framatome, Westinghouse, GE, and other big names. We were just a small company, but at the end of the day, we had a better widget. It was lower price, and we took over. Now we have 100% of the U.S. market in the wet storage area. We then got into dry spent fuel storage, which was a step up in the organization because we had to be the licensee instead of just doing the safety reports and giving it to somebody else. We were the license holder, and we slowly got into that market. We weren't the first, but we looked at what was out on the market, developed a better version of it, and now we have 70% of the U.S. market share in spent fuel management equipment. We took that core piece of our business and we vertically integrated ourselves. We had supply chain issues. With the rapid growth, we realized we had to control things ourselves, so we brought manufacturing in-house. We have 3 U.S. factories. We have a construction team now in site, a site services team, and we leveraged all of that to go out and acquire nuclear plants to decommission, where, again, the core was the fuel. We figured out ways to rapidly defuel them, and that would accelerate the entire decommissioning timeline, and a lot of companies have gone broke doing that, and it's been a very good business for us. And then with the restart, which we're not done yet, but we're well on our way, I think we're in a good position. So it is interesting because for our SMR program, we're putting the first SMRs up at Palisades. We have the financial strength to be able to do that along with our partners, but if you want to build out a fleet, then you need money. And so we have been, I've been actually leading for our executive team engagements with public and private markets to help capitalize the future growth of the company. And to your comment, you know, when I talk to potential investors, I have to adjust my pitch a little bit. I started off by saying we're a pure play nuclear company that has revenue. And I remember one of the gentlemen looked at me, he said, "You have revenue? I wouldn't know how to value you." So it is a bit different for you know, for our type of company, but we're akin more to like a BWXT, who has a very nice multiple, by the way, on the public markets. We're engineering, manufacturing, design. We do equipment for others, and we also have our own SMR. So, you know, to your question about what is our unique strength, I think it's the vertical integration of our company and our ability to respond quickly. And I talked about it on the last panel, so I won't repeat it here, but Holtec is a builder. We put together a team of builders, and that's being done at the early phase of the design. Everyone who's on our team doing key components, from construction to reactor components to INC to fuel to control rods, everyone that's in the design process is going to be the ones that are building those components. And I think that's unique and differentiating when we're talking about first-of-kind delivery.
I mean, there's a crazier one from my point of view. You're about to be an IPP. You're about to be an independent power producer.
Yeah, I think that's it's an excellent point, and I think particularly for our international strategy, having an in-house operator is important. You know, the big problem with exports right now is, you know, the U.S. government has finally realized that we need to export nuclear power to lead the world. It secures 100-year relationships, it's national security, and there's a lot of contested areas where Russia and China make investments in nuclear. They take people and train them at their schools, and they really build a bridge and then control critical assets. We want to compete, but we just really haven't had the right company to compete. In order to compete, you have to, one, have the same scope, the same business model, and the Russians will build, own, and operate abroad under a long-term sovereign guaranteed power purchase agreement. They bring the money, they build the plant, and they'll operate it for 20 years and then sell it to the country. No U.S. company has been willing to offer that. Holtec is looking at this. Once we have the operator up and running, and we do it also at Palisades, we will offer a fully integrated turnkey project overseas that will at least include an operating support package where we can use our operating training program, our simulator, to train workers to be able to operate our plant. And in some markets, under the right protections, we could actually own and operate the plant and offer a comparable package to Russia and China.
Well, I'll just end with saying that I do not wish you luck at Palisades. As somebody living on the correct lakeshore of Lake Illinois over in Chicago, to see Michigan building nuclear and we're not yet, it's going to hurt me a lot. But I'll see if I can get over it if you guys make good progress. So thanks, Rick, for that. Cesare, I know we have some questions here, but one of the big questions I get is, what is Terra Innovatum? Could you quickly share with us the Terra Innovatum story and tell us a little about where your technical worldview comes from and what you're trying to do?
Sure. So Terra Innovatum is a company was co-funded in 2021, but it's my partner. We also started back in 2018. We were kind of in a stealth mode to develop a microreactor even before there was a lot of debate on microreactor at that time. In 2018 was primarily for SMR. And the reason we got here was we were looking as a startup, what would be the bigger challenge to then make this real, because we didn't want to limit ourselves to be a paper reactor. We wanted to make this real for sure. So when it comes to the biggest barrier in nuclear startups, is not really the ability to raise funding, but it's to make the project financeable. So we did how we can make this project financeable, and the way we did it was to attack the major risk in new nuclear projects. And there is this big disconnect between, it's not really the availability of the capital, but it's like the mismatch between the historical timeline for going through the licensing, then going to the deployment. And I was actually, in my previous life, I was involved heavily in the licensing of P1000, which we all know the story. And it took a decade to build and a decade to license. So this is what we kind of started the company with, that kind of big requirements, how we can make this, how we can de-risk the projects so they become very attractive. So what we did was, first of all, we need to go small. Why we wanted to go small? We wanted to leverage, like any other energy sector. Like you think about the solar, they perfected the solar cell. And then after that, it's just a matter to duplicate the solar panels to a big farm. So we wanted to replicate the same type of system in the nuclear, where we have a device which is really perfected. Our solo microreactor is 5 megawatt thermal, 1 megawatt electric. But the power is so low that we basically eliminated by design the possibility by physics of a core melt. Because it's not cooled by water, we eliminated the hydrogen generation, like the Fukushima type of explosions. And so by doing that, then you basically eliminate a bunch of systems that were designed to mitigate for those consequences. So very low risk profile. And also the biggest probably innovation was the ability to use low enriched uranium. In the microreactor landscape, we're probably the only one which are able to use a low enriched uranium. Not only the fact it's low enriched, but it's the exact same fuel product which has been in the market for more than 60 years. 2/3 of the reactor in the world, they use that type of fuel. And then after that was also to look at all the other components to make sure we were using component of the shelf available in the supply chain and existing supply chains, so that we could for that also not only expedite the schedule, minimize the risk, but also have a much higher certainty of cost. Because when it comes to investors, what they look is, they look at the cash flow, when you're going to generate revenue, and they want to have a very, very short horizon, which is very well disconnected by the traditional nuclear project. So that's what we did. We also look at the possibility to extend the total addressable market beyond the United States. We always had the vision to make nuclear as a commodity, like, car industry or things like that, how we can make that so that we can deploy a reactor anywhere. And again, that's where the low-enriched uranium, non-proliferant integrated, then we also integrated safeguards that eliminate or reduce the risk of proliferation, which is a big thing when it comes to deploy reactor overseas or across the globe. So where we are, we just a week ago, we got listed on NASDAQ. We completed our IPO. As far as the licensing, we're following the traditional two-step process, 10 CFR Part 50. We're licensing the first of a kind as a non-power reactor. However, there is a lot of accelerator there, especially on the regulatory side also, because there is like the Part 7, which is for low consequence reactor, which is where our reactor will fit quite well. It's going to be an extension of the non-power reactor that will be extended to reactors, so to power reactors. So in that sense, we can easily transition from first of a kind to end of a kind and have the reactor on the market pretty soon. We're targeting 2028, have the license secure by operating license by the end of 2027. Now, when it comes to other challenges, of course, when it comes to microreactor, there is a lot of movement. Also, obviously, there are still issues when it comes to the operator requirements, which were designed for gigawatt class reactor. They have to change for the microreactor. And also insurances, obviously, the same thing. The risk on such reactor are so small that it's not comparison to large-scale reactors. So that's, I think, the approach we took was to make, again, the project financeable rather than to raise a big amount of money for making this a real.
So something interesting I noticed here, having started my own nuclear journey in about 2012 or so, there were a lot of startups that specifically talked about the difference that changing from LEU would make to being investable. And now what we're hearing, and maybe it's a product of the times, I don't know, or greater familiarity with nuclear, now you're saying that it's specifically using the same thing as before
Yes.
is the innovation in the advanced reactor,
Exactly.
small reactor space.
Exactly.
How the wheel turns. Okay.
That's exactly how we
Okay,
did
and
it.
if I can ask another weird question, I've done some work on nuclear in Italy. I've heard from some folks who know about you guys. Why is it that so many nuclear professors around the world outside of Italy are Italian? Like, what is it? You don't have to link Terra Innovatum to Italy. I'm just saying, why is there such a crazy overrepresentation from such an anti-nuclear country, I might say, both in the supply chain, in owning and operating nuclear plants outside of Italy, and then also it seems like there's a very heavy presence in academia and now in startups of Italian nuclear engineers.
Well, go back maybe what we said, it's 50 plus years, kind of the legacy of Enrico Fermi. It was the first nuclear reactor with the Chicago pile. So we're very proud of that as Italians, but I'm actually a dual citizen, so I'm US and American and Italian, so I kind of fit that pattern pretty well. And half of our team is US and half the team is Italian, so we're a good breed, which is kind of in line with the first reactor, which
So
the Chicago,
That's what I was hearing.
Yeah.
Just as Chicago now is where you get your popes in Italy,
Exactly.
Chicago Americans are who invented and perfected nuclear energy. Write that down in your notes sections for today's talk. Now I'll turn to my favorite Italian-Canadian American, Steve Comello. So I came to Steve last because he has a very interesting role to play in the nuclear community. He doesn't represent any vendors. He's not, I don't know, directly trying to make any money off of nuclear. He was brought in by some heavy hitters in the outside world to make there be more nuclear, not Terra Innovatum nuclear, not Terrestrial nuclear, not Holtec nuclear. If they make more nuclear and he can help them, then he meets his metrics. Steve Comello is here to make there be more nuclear. Now, as somebody who occasionally wants to beat my own industry with a big stick, I would imagine Steve wants to do it twice as often. I'm not trying to provoke him into anger or a diatribe here on stage. However, I would love to know what frustrates Steve the most about the nuclear financing discussion in a safe space where everybody's filled up their notes already with all the great things about Chicago. They have no room to copy you down verbatim, so you're not going to get in trouble for anything you say on this panel about what the industry or parts of the industry is doing wrong. So here we go, Steve. Here's your chance in a perfectly safe, private, closed environment filled with a lucky audience. What is the number one thing you think the industry is doing wrong that we have to correct in order not to miss this precious nuclear window?
Well, thank you, Mark. I appreciate that and happy to be here. So just by a little bit more background, the Nuclear Scaling Initiative is philanthropically funded or collaboration of 3 NGOs, and our KPI is just to get more nuclear in the ground as quickly as possible. I actually want to pick up on a couple of things that Rick said, and then I'll answer your question probably tangentially. And it's going to be a bit of a beef with both the commercial sector and then just how the U.S. thinks about nuclear. So if you think about China, right, they're building a lot domestically, and think they have a lot of ambitions to build internationally come 2030. And when you think about how they've gained this capability, they put a lot of money into this, and they made a lot of mistakes. And the difference is that they saw those mistakes as lessons learned, and then they doubled down and built more. So when you think about Vogel that happened here, we always talk about cost overruns there, which is true. And there's a lot of issues that happened there, from licensing to COVID and so on. But basically, the Chinese did the same thing. They built 2 reactors and they blew it. And then they said, you know what, let's go build another 8. And now they're stamping these things out basically on a 48-month cadence. Let's go and take a look at what's happening in Central and Eastern Europe. In Central Eastern Europe, I was actually at the Warsaw Security Forum, and we had Donald Tusk, the Prime Minister of Poland, talk about how his country is on a war footing. Who came and spoke after him was Vladimir Zelensky, and he's also in a bit of a war footing. The way that they think about energy there is not how we think about it here. It is in their national security, it's in their sovereign identity to have an energy source that is durable and they don't rely on others. Hold that thought. Let's go to Canada now. Canada had been building the CANDU reactor for a long time and operating them. And they had just finished, especially in Ontario, they spent a lot of time refurbishing their CANDU reactors. And then you have this fantastic workforce that's just sitting there. And so what Canada did is they made the strategic decision to go and build an American technology, which is probably your competitor, right? The BWRX 300. They went and invested $500 million of their own money to put these people to work to prove the case that they can actually go and design, build, and operate SMRs. Now think about that. That was an economic, a geoeconomic and geostrategic play that once they're successful, and hopefully they are successful, they'll be able to export internationally. So what do these 3 instances all have in common? The government took a role in supporting a national industry that has international ramifications. Here's some numbers for you. If you think about the tripling of nuclear declaration that was made at COP28 in Dubai in December of 2023, what does that actually mean? It's about 1 terawatt, 1.2 terawatts. That's 50 gigawatts a year for every year for 20 years, and we've never done that before, right? Our high water mark was 1983, and that was 33 gigawatts. We're talking about a $15 trillion opportunity, right? And right now, the US is not there. It's great in operation. There's some fuel fabrication there. It's great in decommissioning. It's great in spent nuclear fuel management. But in terms of development and construction, it's just not there. So the way that I think about this is I would wish for the federal government to add just a little bit more of the tool set that it's already provided. ITCs, fantastic. LPO, fantastic. ARDP, fantastic. But going back to something that Rick said, you need to deploy fleets. You need a really large fleet. You need a strong demand signal to essentially incent the entire supply chain to make capital investments so that you're actually forming a learning curve and buying down that risk over time. No one is going to take that bet on its own. No commercial actor can. I think you're going to see some of that with respect to, say, hyperscalers. They might put up some risk capital. But you really need just a little bit more of a push from the federal government, I think, just to get that going. And I think the commercial sector can take off.
So
now,
you're saying that...
No, wait, I'm not done. So this is where I get pissed off at the commercial industry. This administration, I think, is really deal-focused, very deal-focused. And I think there's openness to provide what the commercial industry wants if they came with a specific ask. A specific ask. I feel that the commercial industry has done a lot of work in silos, but really working the triangle of within the commercial sector, working with the feds, working with the states, and actually coming with a specific deal for which there's conviction that if said federal government did X, you will build. What I hear a lot of is, if you give me X, I might do something. There is no politician who is going to spend political capital on a might. And so from the way that it looks in DC, where I live, basically they feel they've given the nuclear industry everything they want and nothing's happening. And nothing's happening. And they're not necessarily wrong. They're not necessarily right, but they're not necessarily wrong. So my charge to the commercial sector is, don't make announcements. Come with a specific deal with conviction and be bold and be creative and say, I will go and build 10 of a kind, 15 of a kind. And look, if we're going to go and quadruple nuclear in the US by 2050, we're building 12 gigawatts a year every year for 25 years. There's more than enough room for everybody. But come with a specific deal, and it could be a lot of money, but come with a specific deal that if you provide X, we will do Y. And I think that will break the logjam, which I feel has been within the US industry for probably the last 5 or 6 years.
Okay, so I was taking careful mental notes. What you're saying is we need to have an MOU declaring as an industry, an understanding that we have no more MOUs, and then we can announce that one.
No, not an MOU. It's basically, essentially, a deal has been struck and everyone will say yes, but for X. And I think you will get your X.
Steve, I was just trolling, just to
I know.
cut the tension, lighten the mood a little. But now you see why Steve is a very important presence now in our industry, and he's great to knock ideas off too.
I don't think I was that dour.
No, it was jolly. It's just a very heavy message, and it's an unusual and very welcome one, and I think on a panel like this. So, one of the questions I wanted to put to the panel before we ask the audience what they really feel about things, and I do want to hear, so be thinking of questions. You've got an interesting panel, and you can either direct it, or I'll try to direct it, or we'll just tackle it as a team. But one of the things, if we're talking about more things that can be thrown into the pot to either show us that there's even fewer excuses to build, or maybe get a few people over the line, or be the missing ingredient to bring a deal straight to Trump, there's been talk of green bonds or financial instruments, especially interesting to those Europeans out there, that identify characteristics that are desired of energy sources or power sources, and then putting that as part of financial rules to provide state-backed or advantaged, otherwise legally advantaged financing. So-called green nuclear bonds is the word that I hear a lot. And I've heard chitter-chatter that some big things might be coming next year. So I want to hear maybe a yes and here's why, or a no and here's why. Would green nuclear bonds that redirect legal focus on investors' legal focus on the attributes of nuclear, is that still needed at this point? There are people who say we're so far down the nuclear discussion that that's just extra, and plus, ESG, dirty word now, we've stepped away from that. Is this still a helpful thing? As if the lift came from outside the nuclear sector, would this still help, or is this still not enough? So I want to start with you, Simon. Green nuclear bonds, is this a help for you?
No, I'll tell you why. Okay, green nuclear bonds is a way of perfecting the capital structure on an existing nuclear plant, existing project. What the industry needs now is equity. Equity is the piece of the capital structure that de-risks.
Thank you, Simon. Rick?
Yeah, not right now. I mean, once nuclear is up and running, additional pools of capital will be needed. But, and there's a ton of interest in nuclear, right? And you're seeing valuations, but this is equity interest. What we really need is project equity, and there's no money going into project equity because single plant construction risk, nobody will take any risk. The utilities don't want to take any risk because of the cost overruns, and they're basically, going to be judged by Moody's and the credit rating agency and their borrowing costs. They finance electricity sales every month, so if they have any ding on their credit, their business goes kaput. So they're not going to take any risk. The technology companies just want to sell their technology for high profit. They don't want to take any risk, and they definitely don't want to do construction. And then you have the construction companies saying, well, I'll do it for time and materials, but it's not my design. And so you have this conundrum where nobody will take risk. And so then equity folks definitely aren't going to put private sources of capital when they have uncapped risk. And even LPO, if you want to go to LPO, they're going to require that you have balance sheet in the game. And capital providers are not going to lend their balance sheet. It might as well be converted to an equity investment. And so the real delay here is at the project financing level. And I don't think bonds will help that. And if you look out, to Steve's comments, which were very smart comments, but it focused on the federal. So I guess, we're here in Texas. I was in Sweden last week, which actually has a smaller economy, I think, than Texas. It's about 15 million people. They just put together a program to enable new nuclear where the government will give you a contract for difference. Basically, it's as good as like a power purchase agreement. You sell to the market, but they'll make up the difference up to some threshold. And they will borrow money from the state and give you a 2.5% interest loan through construction, after which it starts to ramp up. And the real problem, aside from the risk piece, is it's very difficult to make a business case based on the way current markets are structured. Like, it's very difficult. And if you really want to move this industry, the federal government can do something, but what I think we could also see is states with major economies stepping up. There's no reason Texas couldn't put together the exact same program the Swedes did. And if they did that, you would see a massive build out of nuclear. There was so much excitement in Sweden because they have access to capital, they have a government-backed power purchase agreement, and you can then capitalize and raise project financing to go forward.
Mic drop moment if they weren't on stands. All right, so free idea, not from me, but you can take it. Fission Energy Resource Credits, or FERC. Take that to the Texas State Capitol. They'll love it. Free idea. Take it. Okay, we're actually close on time despite me begging you for questions. I feel terrible about that. Quickly, Steve, I could have sworn out of the corner of my eye I saw a nod that green nuclear bonds might help. Do you have the only yes on the panel? Where do you stand on this?
No, I would basically just repeat what Rick said. It was well said. Green bonds are cool, but look, at this stage, I don't think that they're really going to move the needle. They're nice, but they're insufficient.
Got it. And then finally, Cesare, do you want to put this thing in its coffin, or you want to give a dissent?
No, I mean, as I said at the beginning, we really wanted to make nuclear as any other commodity in the energy landscape. So we don't see a difference between a nuclear system and any other nuclear asset. So the only thing we approached this was to make it, the financial burden to reduce to the minimum, and also speed to market. So we can be on the ground generating revenue as soon as possible, and that's, I see, the only way that by economics, really, you can win.
All right. Please, a round of applause for my 4 panelists. And
That's good. I like your comments.
and I now that I'm actually in the